a good friend of the show who joins us quite frequently. We do have Alex Traiman, the CEO and Jerusalem Bureau Chief at the Jewish News Syndicate. Thank you so much for taking the time, as always, to be here with us today.
Josh, thanks for having me.
Of course. Well, first off, I do want to talk about the Israeli civilian that was killed there in Lebanon. Is it fairly common to see an Israeli civilian cross over there into Lebanon as all of this is going on, or maybe just in general?
Well, I think important for you to note that you saw he was in Army fatigues and he was with the IDF. It's actually not the first time that he's been in the war zone. I actually saw a video just a few minutes ago of him earlier in Gaza, at the time investigating whether they may have found the grave or one of the places where Jonah the prophet may have been. And here in southern Lebanon, in this fortress that he was looking at, they were reportedly looking for a tomb of one of Jesus's disciples. So this was something that had been done before, but it's not common, and it's not like he wandered into a war zone on his own. He was fully escorted by the IDF. Questions as to who gave approvals for that, that will probably come out in the coming days.
Does this kind of speak to, I guess, the severity of the situation when you talk about the fact that he was escorted over by the IDF and, there's fighting going on? They were under the impression that this area had been cleared of Hezbollah terrorists, but they were still there. So does it speak to the danger and seriousness of the situation in Lebanon?
I mean, it's an active war zone. I mean, I think anybody that goes in understands that they're taking their lives potentially into their own hands. That includes soldiers and anybody that's going along with soldiers. I mean, this is unfortunately the realities of war. It's a very dangerous situation. And as we've seen in Gaza over and over again, areas that the IDF believed to have been cleared become repopulated sometimes by terrorists, and it often forces the IDF to go back into these areas again and again.
Will this likely lead to any sort of maybe changes in the way that the IDF operates, handles that situation in Lebanon, or is it just maybe a one-off situation that didn't end, of course, the way that anyone intended?
Yeah, I don't think there's too many other 71-year-old brave mustached archaeologists that are going to be willing to go into the war zone with the IDF. So hopefully this was just an unfortunate one-off. But Zevarolech is being lauded, all across Israeli societies as being like a very knowledgeable archaeologist who's deeply connected to the land of the Bible and knew more about it than most anybody else in the country.
And we are taking a live look on the left-hand side of your screen that is over Beirut there in Lebanon at the Israel border. As you can see, smoke rising. We do know that the strikes continue. Israel is striking those Hezbollah strongholds. Now, the leader of Hezbollah did say just yesterday that Hezbollah has approved essentially the U.S. proposal for a ceasefire between Israel and Hezbollah. But does that appear to be more likely to happen than maybe it did several weeks or even months ago?
No, I don't think that we're actually close to a ceasefire here between Israel and Hezbollah. I think that this is an exercise probably in futility. I don't believe even the reports that Hezbollah has agreed to the U.S. terms for a ceasefire. I think that what has happened is Hezbollah has responded to the U.S. proposal with its own suggestions and comments and approved its own version of what a ceasefire could look like. And they're saying the ball's in Israel's court, but I have a strong feeling that the terms that Hezbollah has presented are certainly not anything that Israel would consider accepting at this time.
And we've heard the same thing over time there from Hamas, where they've said, we agree to this, but it's a completely different proposal overall. So you are talking about a terrorist organization. It's important to point that out. So the U.S. once again actually vetoed a United Nations resolution that called for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza, saying that it did not mention releasing the hostages right away. So what does that say to you maybe about the relationship here between the U.S. and Israel as it stands right now?
Well, certainly the United States didn't abstain from that resolution, which was something that everybody in Israel was worried about. People on pins and needles about whether the U.S. would actually veto such a resolution. But I think it's also important to understand that the United States has tremendous weight in these committees before resolutions come to a vote. And the United States could have even prevented this resolution from coming for a vote, but clearly they didn't. And I think that they were trying to either scare Israel or sending a warning that they could potentially abstain from a further resolution. So they didn't just stand up and out of hand say that resolutions like this are not going to be coming to the agenda. They're saying, look, we're considering it this time around. We've decided to veto it. Maybe next time we won't. And therefore, it's a waiting game, really. With Israel for to try to get to January 20th and the next administration.
When we talk about the next administration, we have President-elect Trump just less than 2 months away from inauguration. So once he takes over, is there likely to be any sort of, I guess, change in that relationship between the U.S. and Israel when you go from President Biden, who has had his sort of tiffs there with Benjamin Netanyahu? Is it different with President-elect Trump?
Oh, I think it's going to be much different, and I think Israelis are counting the days and just trying to bide their time until he gets into office. I mean, the President Trump has already said on day one he's going to stop slow walking weapons that the United States has been holding back from giving over to Israel. And we just saw a report just came out by JINSA, an organization that deals with the military relationships between the U.S. and Israel, detailing in great depth the amount of weapons that have been held up. So the incoming president-elect has said that he's going to allow all the weapons through. Certainly, there's going to be much more support for Israel in the diplomatic forums, like the United Nations, like the International Criminal Court and the International Court of Justice. I think you're going to see, and you've already seen warnings from Republican senators saying that they would take strict action against the International Criminal Court and others if they would issue arrest warrants for the prime minister. And I think that even the calculation of the attacks that Israel's taking in Lebanon, in Syria, and Iraq, and potentially even against Iran could be done in coordination with the United States. Whether or not the United States would participate in such attacks, and also for that matter against the Houthis in Yemen, which have interrupted the commercial shipping in the Red Sea, I do think that there's going to be a much stronger working relationship between the two administrations.
Where does everything stand over in Gaza with Hamas? We've talked a lot about Hezbollah. We're hearing a lot about the situation with Hezbollah as there are these near daily barrages of rockets that are being fired over at Israel. We know Israel is striking those Hezbollah strongholds. But when we talk about Gaza and Hamas, where does that situation stand? Is Israel any closer to reaching its goals in that situation and that war?
Well, certainly the number one goal of the operation, which is to get the hostages back, has not been accomplished. The prime minister was actually on the ground in the Gaza Strip yesterday, and he issued a call for a $5 million reward for anybody that provides information that leads to the release of hostages or the returning of hostages to Israel. And I think so. You're also seeing that Israel continues to go back into these areas where Hamas is regrouped. And there are firefights that are taking place on a regular basis inside the Gaza Strip. And I think the other issue here is that of Hamas's rule as a political force, and specifically with regard to the distribution of the humanitarian aid. And I do believe that as you get closer to a Trump administration, we already heard the finance minister in the last 24 hours talk about the potential of Israel taking over the distribution of humanitarian aid, which would further distance Hamas from any kind of power role in the Gaza Strip. And that's certainly the major goals of the operation, are to make sure that Hamas is no longer a military threat, no longer a political force in Gaza, which means they also need to be replaced by another force, and the hostages back. So Israel's doing a very effective job of moving forward towards those goals. But as we see, it's a slow roll.
My last question for you, there's been a lot of discussion here about those humanitarian aid trucks, convoys that have been overtaken by gunmen. This is not really something new, right? It's been going on for a while. And is it Hamas terrorists that are doing it? Is it other folks out there?
Yeah, this is happening really since the beginning of the delivery of humanitarian aid. Those with the guns are able to basically hijack the humanitarian aid coming in, make sure that they're going to the people that they want it to go to. There's probably also a lot of like black market selling of humanitarian aid, people making money off of the distribution of the humanitarian aid. It's kind of like a mafia taking place right now, and so Israel wants to have that come to an end. And at this point, the only logical alternative to Hamas distributing humanitarian aid, or UNRWA distributing humanitarian aid, which essentially is an UN agency working for and with Hamas, is for Israel to be responsible for it, and that's going to bring about greater questions as to, what role of governing the Gaza Strip does Israel have, at least in the short term. You may hear, with the inauguration of President Trump, more and more talk about a provisional military government led by Israel inside the Gaza Strip until such a time that other more moderate Palestinians or others can take over, and also potentially what land Israel may decide to keep for itself in the future, and whether or not at some point in the distant future, if Jewish residents would be entitled to return to the Gaza Strip where they used to live until 2005 with the Israel withdrawal.
All right. Alex Traiman, as always, thank you so much for taking the time to join us and break down all the latest developments. So many things happening really over a matter of hours over the last more than a year at this point. Anything else you want to add before I let you go?
Well, certainly, the head of the terror octopus here is Iran, and what you're seeing still in the remaining days of the Biden administration is the attempt to try to look at all of these conflicts as isolated. The war between Israel and Hamas, the separate war between Israel and Hezbollah, all of these fronts, which include even this week, which include from the Houthis, Israel striking inside Syria, Israel would potentially is threatening to strike inside Iraq. These are all connected to Iran, and I think that the big question is, with the new administration coming in, is what will be the Trump administration's approach to tackling the head of this terror octopus, which refers to the regime itself, whether they will continue to govern Iran or whether there will be a push for regime change, and whether Israel, and possibly together with the United States, will be given a green light to take out these illicit nuclear sites, which provide an existential threat to the entire Middle East and the state of Israel.
All right. Alex, thank you again for taking the time to be here with us, and I hope you have a good rest of your day.
Thanks so much, Josh.
All right. And I do want to take you out to some breaking news.